Welcome to today's edition of Daytime Dialogues. It's my great honor and privilege to welcome Dr. Erica Brown to our conversation. Dr. Brown is the director of the Mayberg Center for Jewish Education and Leadership and associate professor of curriculum and pedagogy at George Washington University. She was a Jerusalem Fellow, a faculty member of Wexner, an Avichai Fellow, a recipient of the 2009 Covenant Award, which probably should give you an idea of how significant of a personality that she is. And that's not even counting the 12 books that she has published and the one that's in the works on Cohelet. And so I thank you so very much, Dr. Brown, for joining us today.
What a delight to be with you in the middle of the day. And far be it for me to correct you, but the most important thing of my resume is that I'm the grandmother of Adi and Lev Brown, who are now in Chicago. So please send them my great regards.
We will. And for those who may not have put everything together, Dr. Brown's son, Gavi Brown, is my new assistant principal at Ida Crown Jewish Academy. It's one of the best hires I did in recent years. And so it's a pleasure to have him and now his mother on the show, but she's on the show because of her, but gets nachas because of him. So thank you so very much. I just really wanted to get started a little bit and just talk about the Jewish world today and where we're at. There's so many strange things that seem to be happening and so many wonderful possibilities that seem to be happening. Just to put it out there, for example, the latest Pew study, which came out with the numbers. And if you really look at it, you see pretty clearly the rise in the Orthodox Jewish community, the slow decline in the conservative community, the stability of the Reformed community, which is not that stable. But looking out forward, we have a lot of challenges ahead because things are shifting. What kind of challenges do you think we have to start really getting ready for?
Yeah, I mean, I want to start off with maybe all the I think the brachot or the blessings, particularly for the Orthodox community that came out of the Pew study, which noted the very high level of life satisfaction of members of the Orthodox community, a sense of financial stability, a sense of living a life of purpose and meaning, a sense of strong communities, strong families. In many ways, responses, I think, to some of the greatest ills of society, and sometimes we're so ensconced in our own problems, we don't actually step back and say, wow, things are really working well. As we say in Tefillah, Sabenu Metuvecha, right? And we get our blessings, then we can say V'taher Libenu, like we'll discuss Avdecha Be'emet. We can discuss the Emet, some of the more difficult circumstances. Certainly, we're living in a time of intense polarization. That's political polarization. I think for many of us, that's kind of new. I would say, the past 10 years of political polarization and how that's affected who you have at your Shabbat table and the way in which you interact. I think that's significant, and that's something we have to pay attention to. I think there are global problems that we can no longer avoid, that sometimes we put our head in the sand when it comes to ecological disasters, climate issues, and other things. And I think that's something we're paying attention to. I'm very concerned about segments of the Orthodox community that are anti-science and particularly anti-medicine. And we've had experiences of that of late. People not vaccinating, people not paying attention to government warnings and policy warnings, and having events that spread COVID. So I think there's certain aspects of vigilance that I think we need to pay careful attention to right now.
Well, to pick up on actually all of those comments, all of them are not really Jewish in nature. The polarization, it also hits us. The political polarization hits our community just from language that we use and the way we're willing to either demonize or marginalize groups. Global climate, let's go back to the polarization, even though there are some in the right wing who are beginning to admit that maybe this weather we've been experiencing is real and is a real change. And especially the anti-science. It's interesting. I don't know if you saw in the news today, that Reb Chaim Kanievsky came out
Yes.
with a pronouncement that if teachers in the Haredi schools don't vaccinate, they should be suspended from teaching.
Yeah.
So we have segments who are anti-science. I think people are tired I spoke yesterday to Rav Schechter. I was
Mm.
asking him in Chicago, there's a mask mandate on all indoor facilities. In the state and the county, there are exemptions for religious institutions because they don't want to get into the church state issue.
Right.
And I asked Rav Schechter yesterday his opinion. I said, halachically, if there's a sveka, the smallest of doubts, we violate Shabbat for health.
Right.
We have to prove that we care about a person's health more than anyone else. So if a city says mask, mask. Is fake a little bit of a doubt, then they're experts. So I'm not sure if those are Jewish. Anyways, when I look at the pew and I look at some of the Jewish pieces, and I agree with you, and I thank you for starting with all the good. We are happier, we are wealthier, we are have opportunities like never before. Some of the challenges in the Jewish community I see unique, and it may be different than what some people may consider, is actually the demise of the non-Orthodox, or the lowering of the non-Orthodox Jews in our communities. It's a Jewish community that's just an Orthodox community in America is diminished in many ways.
Absolutely.
And even the fact that I think one of the big challenges we have is if we are growing. I forgot what the percent under, what is it, under 25, or it's under the children are about 25% of American Jewish children are Orthodox. But it's the responsibility we have to, to rise to the challenge. We can't just be takers anymore. We have to start giving. Which
Well, look, that's been, I mean, the issues I talked about are global issues. They're not exclusive to the Jewish community, but we're deeply impacted by them. And so I think it's worth mentioning that I think it is a priority in the Orthodox community to tackle issues of polarization and to make the case for science and medicine and protecting the environment. We are stewards of the planet, and we stand side by side with the citizens of the world. As Rav Soloveitchik understood what Tikkun Olam was, we stand side by side in trying to repair and remedy some of the society's deepest problems. But I do think the Orthodox have a particular responsibility to strengthen Judaism across the denominations, and what we see in the Pew Study and others, the rise of the just Jewish category, where people aren't affiliated with any movement and don't see the membership in a synagogue or even a JCC as part of the peoplehood equation. Certainly, I've given my life to that commitment of going out and saying, here's the beauty and richness of Shabbat, and you can use Shabbat as a means of digital detox and reconnecting with your family and taking a break from work. As I think it's upon us, and I don't think many modern Orthodox or centrist Orthodox Jews see their role as kiruv, and I think that that's what it's about. And it was if you have a beautiful Shabbat table on Shabbat, this is not about social dining. Invite people you don't know to the table. Create a community of strangers who become friends. And I think that has not, we've left that to other segments of the Orthodox community like Chabad and others to do that work. When I think that work is upon us to do. We have something very beautiful. We have day schools that have had an uptick because of COVID. These are schools that have stayed open, that have provided communities of values and ways in which students can grow in their commitment, not only to Judaism, but their commitment to the world and to being better citizens. And we're seeing an uptick because we're providing something that other people don't have. But it's up to us to give that gift to others.
I agree. Why do you think that in the centrist modern Orthodox world, we really haven't done our share in Kiruv, and most of it is on the Haredi side of the world?
So you might not like what I'm going to say, and I'm not sure I like what I'm going to say, but I think that the centrist Orthodox community, of which we're card-carrying members, has placed a really high price on achievement, on our own personal achievement, and that we haven't really signed on to what it means to bring others into the richness of the fold. The idea that it's expensive to live in Orthodox communities, that tuitions are expensive, that the lifestyle is expensive, and therefore we put a lot of energy into making sure that we can afford to do this and that our children can afford to live this lifestyle, as opposed to saying maybe there's certain material sacrifices we're prepared to make to enrich the fabric of society at large, and particularly those Jews who are marginally connected, and maybe a good word, a kind gesture will mean a great deal in terms of them thinking that Judaism has something to offer.
Do you think it's possible? Do you think we can change this whole move in terms of where American Jewry is and the modern Orthodox community? We can shift them over to thinking about the rest of the world, the rest of the Jewish people.
Look, someone was calling, wanting right now. Um, I wouldn't do what I do if I didn't think it was possible. But I will say, as someone who spent 17 years in the Federation community and Jewish nonprofits, and in working across the Jewish community for the past 30 plus years, it's kind of lonely here. Right? And it was, our lives are so full with our own events, and with our own community interests, with our own charities, that it takes an expansion of one's bandwidth to think about what this would mean. And maybe now, with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur approaching, I often think about the fact that when we recite our confessional, that's in the plural. When we offer a korban chatat, that's a group. That's something that the Kohen Gadol does on behalf of all of us. And sometimes I think, well, maybe part of that korban is that we did not think to share the wealth that we have, the spiritual wealth that we have, sufficiently with other Jews who are spiritually impoverished because they don't have this. I do believe it's possible, but it does require certain kind of hard wiring, and I say this with some trepidation, it does take a different kind of leadership. We don't necessarily have many voices out there that are promoting this message. Certainly, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, of blessed memory, my teacher, my own personal teacher, and I would say mentor on so many different levels. I think put faith on the docket for the faithless, and I think if we think about his example, maybe in his memory, is to say, what am I doing for the good of the world? How do I take these messages to Jews who could benefit from them?
It's interesting. His first yahrzeit is coming up, as you know, and his team in England are working on a worldwide effort to have communities study. And one of the themes that they're talking about, I received an email today from his assistant Joanna Ben Arush, who's many of us in Chicago knew from her visits with Rabbi Sachs, about the learning that they want to do to continue those messages. So maybe those are the opportunities. It's a sea change in the way we think.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of fascinating that the most insular segment of our communities, the Haredi communities, are the ones who reach out the most, and the most open segment of our community, the modern Orthodox community, are the ones who aren't reaching in the same way.
Yeah, I look. One of the reactions in speaking in an Orthodox Union forum, and also in writing for Jewish Action that'll come out soon, is one of the statistics that I think we have to pay attention to is we're actually doing a lot of cure in the Orthodox community, but we're not doing so much internally either. So I want to add that as a segment to our conversation, if I may, that we haven't taken a lot of resources and put them into our own sort of schools and make sure that people who are graduating a Jewish day school feel energized and inspired by Jewish education. I don't have to tell you, because this is what you've dedicated your life to. And I'm concerned that this isn't. I'll say this differently. The idea from the Talmud of working on yourself, and then afterwards working on others. You know, we need to sort of figure out the path forward to being having a maser. Like we give our money, we maser our money, we tithe our money, but we don't necessarily tithe our time. And what does it mean to actually do a certain inventory, spiritual inventory of our own selflessness? And what, Could we tithe a little bit of time? Could this be a conversation that we have at the Rosh Hashanah table with our families of what are we doing on behalf of world Jewry, or even Jews who are alienated, who live close by us? What would that look like practically?
Well, this is, there are two things that are coming to mind immediately. One is, again, the Pew talked about the outflow versus the inflow, the kiru versus those who we are losing. And we're only bringing in about 50% of the number of people that we're losing. So we're losing twice as many as we're bringing through kiruv, and the in-reach would be so much more powerful. But we're also dealing in an age of the millennials, who are pay to play, who are not organizational oriented. I encounter that a lot nowadays in synagogue life and in school life. It used to be a time, I remember the good old days when the kids in high school were either in B'nai Akiva or NCSY, and the fights were vicious, not physical, but which was better and who has which allegiance. And now it's just who's setting up the better Shabbaton.
Yeah.
And so with the millennial generation, it's even more complicated to achieve that goal of outreach, in-reach, of engagement, of community affiliations.
Yeah, I want to share a metaphor that I have found very helpful on this front. So it used to be when you joined a Jewish community in America, it was like a fixed price menu. You sort of joined, you became a member of the federation, school, your shul, or it was a congregational school. It was, you gave to Jewish charities. You sort of were all in. And then we moved to the a la carte menu, right? So we had some strange things going on where people would they had their kids in day schools, but they weren't necessarily in synagogues, right? Outside of the Orthodox community. Those are things that popped up in demographic studies in some of the main metropolitan areas in the United States, that people were sort of coming in as a fee for service. I'll come to the synagogue for a bar mitzvah or for a major family event, but I'm not really interested in being all in. And then someone helped me and said, and now, as a result of the millennial population, we're in the tapas menu. You taste a lot of different things and you see what you like. But of course, there's the question of who pays the utility bills if you're going from service to service. Now, sometimes that becomes a judgment that baby boomers and sandwich generation and traditionalists put on the millennial population. We actually know that the millennial population is a much more spiritual population. They don't just join things because they're there. They join them because they add value and meaning, which I think for me, I translate into the challenge of this generation is to say, if you're going to provide a tapas menu, make it a fantastic menu, and then word of mouth will drive people to come. And I think that's the challenge, is to say we have something wonderful and beautiful. We haven't always marketed it well. Let's do a better job marketing it. Let's not be judgmental. Let's let people experience this without the guilt, with the joy instead of the oi, and see what we can do in terms of bringing more people to the table.
So if you were to look out optimistically, 5-10 years out, and assuming Mashiach isn't coming in that period of time, which if he does, we change all of the calculus. 5-10 years out, and things are going well for the Jewish community in America. Will we still have the mega shuls? Will we still have Jewish day schools as we know them? What do you think will be the big differences if we're paying attention to that?
Oh, gosh. I didn't know that prognostication was part of this, but okay. So I'll make a prediction or two. I think big synagogues never really worked. I think we've had some interesting Harvard Business Review studies of mega churches. Their success has always been in breaking communities into smaller units. And I think people are looking for meaning and intimacy if they're going to spend the time and money to join a synagogue as opposed to joining a gym, for those for whom this is optional. I think people are looking for that intimacy, and to the degree that we can provide that, I think that's important. I actually think there's going to be an uptick in Jewish day schools. not only in the Orthodox community, but in the non-Orthodox community, in the entire Jewish community, because I think people are looking for a more values-driven education, a character-driven education, and I think that's something that we need to advertise and not assume. We can't assume that just because we make a school, people will come. We've got to really create a values proposition that is different than what they can get elsewhere. I think we need to tell that story in a more meaningful way. But I see a rise in schools. I also think that in order for the American Jewish community to become what it needs to become, the attitude to Israel has to change. You've got a lot of people writing now about the divisions between American Jews and Israeli Jews, the political divide, the certain crises that take place in Israel around the chief rabbinate that have become problematic for American Jews, and yet Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah. We all know that when people have meaningful experiences in Israel, that those experiences translate into deeper Jewish identities in the diaspora, and our job is to rehabilitate the reputation of Israel. All of us. I work on a college campus. It's a hard place to say I love Israel. I imagine for many people, they read the news, and being in the office is a hard place to say I love Israel. But I think Israel will. I hope will see a change, a shift in anti-Semitism, and a shift in people seeing Israel as the nucleus and the life-giving force of Judaism that will disseminate to the world at large.
So Israel is massive on the agenda, and at GW, is it really a problem? I know all campuses
I,
are.
I won't say it's a problem. I think we just built a brand new, beautiful Hillel in the center of campus. We've managed, when there have been small incidents, we've managed to marshal resources to strengthen them. The past presidents of GW and the current president of GW has been a huge supporter. So I don't see it here, but I'm also not ignorant of what happens in higher education, and we pay attention. We have to pay attention. I don't get afraid of BDS. I think people get very, very afraid of that. And yet at the same time, I think there is hesitation around talking about Israel on campus. And I think we send out our students to Hillels all over, and the Hillel becomes an important shelter for them, no matter what campus they're on. We've got to do our job to make sure our Hillel professionals feel strong.
And on your second point of the day schools, it'll be that the expansion of non-Orthodox day schools will be challenging with the shift in the non-Orthodox streams. The fact that Schechters are way down in their numbers, and there still never became a large movement of non-conservative or Orthodox day schools as big as Rav Sak might be, or whatever else those organizations will be. That's going to be a big shift. But we have
It
just
may be a big shift. It may be a big shift. I'm not a sociologist, but if I were a sociologist, reading the history books of predictions about orthodoxy, no one could have foreseen just how strong the Orthodox community in America would be. And so we see that things work in cycles. And although I, of course, read sociological studies and I think they're important, I don't think they tell the whole story. And I'm very glad we didn't pay careful attention to them. As I think that things work in cycles that we can't always predict. And that COVID. I think the impact of COVID on the Jewish community. We're years from being over and understanding how that has shifted the religious and faith climate, and we simply don't know. We simply don't know.
so just to shift in the last few minutes that I have of your time, you're coming out with a new book on Cohelet. I assume it'll be Magid Press also, or
Indeed, it will.
Eighth Press, however we're going to call it. And you deal in Cohelet, the famous phrase of Kol Hevel. How do you explain that to people when it sounds such a statement of despair?
Yeah, it's been an amazing experience working on this Perush, working on a commentary right now, right? In other words, we're still in that sort of post-COVID, or I would say COVID climate, and there's been so many existential sort of dilemmas that we're faced with. So I feel particularly privileged to work on it. And I don't find it to be a book of despair. I find it to be a book of contradictions that mirror the way in which we experience life, which is that we go through, eight lintoa, times to build and time to plant and a time to reap and a time to laugh. And then we go through other cycles, times to grieve and time to mourn. And there's a certain human musings on philosophical musings on the ways in which life maintains its mystery to us. There are people who try, I'll give you an example, Ibn Ezra tries to reconcile all the contradictions in Sefer Cohelet. And there are other commentators, many of them modern, who just embrace it and say, life is full of contradictions. And we, on Sukkot, we read it on Sukkot, which is in itself a time of contradictions. We hold the fruit of our labor in our hands and we bless our arba minim, and we sit in a sukkah and we're aware of our vulnerability. And those two things, human dignity and majesty and vulnerability, come together in such a profound way. And so I feel blessed to live in the contradictions. And I think one of the things that gives me hope is, just as you can say there's a time to grieve, there's a time to celebrate. And so if we know that when we celebrate, mourning might be on the horizon, but we know when we're mourning that birth will be on the horizon, that gives us certain hope in the darker days that good things will come.
And is that going to be one of the chidushim of your commentary on the book of Kohelet?
Oh, I don't know if I have any chidushim, Rabbi. I wish I had chidushim. I'm a collector. As Cohelet collected aphorisms, I'm collecting, ancient scholarship and modern scholarship, and also modern writing. One of the things I talk about is that Freud and Rilke were walking, and Rilke, mourned the transience of everything. Things are so fleeting, and the beauty disappears so quickly, and Freud counteracted that and said, because things dissipate so quickly, grab hold of the moment and make it as beautiful as possible.
So put all of that together. And when is the book going to be coming out?
Oh, I don't know, 100 years. I think it's not going to be out. My guess is 2023. Hopefully, it'll be finished in 2022. It's a pretty big book. Having done Esther, and that took many years. I think it'll take a while.
So is it fair to say those are your two favorite of the five Megillot, Esther and Kohelet?
I try not to pick favorites as a parent and as a writer and as a teacher. But I really do. I do love Cohelet, and I think it's gotten a bad rap. I think actually in the times that we live in, with the amount of insecurity that we experience and vulnerability, it's nice to know that that's shared by ancient wisdom, and that although there was some controversy about canonizing it, that canonizing it meant also canonizing the sentiment that things can be difficult, and that we can live with despondency and also joy, and we can make meaningful lives nonetheless, right?
So I will agree with you completely, but I also will use that as the opportunity to thank you for your time. I've had a lot of fun having this conversation with you.
Well, not as much fun as I had. Thank you.
Okay, and I look forward to you visiting Chicago. We will make sure that by the time you come, that your grandchildren will know that the thing that you call soda is actually pop.
Okay.
And some other important words along the way. There's no such thing as sneakers. There's gym shoes in Chicago.
Okay. All right, good to know.
And we'll have to translate. We'll get you the dictionary.
Thank you.
I thank you so very much for your time. And I look forward to seeing you in person very soon.
Thank you. May it be a year of meaning and blessing. Thanks so much for having me.
Bye-bye.